Now let us sing.
Sing to the power of the faith within.
Now let us sing.
Sing to the power of the faith within.
Lift up your voice.
Lift up your voice.
Be not afraid.
Be not afraid.
Now let us
Sing to the power of the faith within.
Now let us sing.
Sing to the power of the hope within.
Now let us sing.
Sing to the power of the hope within.
Lift up your
Lift
voice.
up your voice.
Be not afraid.
Be not afraid.
Now let us
Sing to the power of the hope within.
Now let us sing.
Sing to the power of the love within.
Now let us sing.
Sing to the power of the love within.
Lift up your
Lift up your
voice. Be
voice.
not
Be
afraid.
not afraid.
Now let us
Sing to the power of the love within.
Now let us sing.
Sing to the power of the joy within.
Now let us sing.
Sing to the power of the joy within.
Lift up your
Lift up your
voice. Be
voice.
not
Be
afraid.
not afraid.
Now let us
Sing to the power of the joy within.
Good evening, everyone. I'm recording this a little bit later than I had previously planned. It's super dark out now, but I thought I'd do so outside so that we could hear the ambient noises of the evening. The insects, the birds, perhaps. Cars going down the street. Maybe some people yelling. Who knows what'll happen. But the late hour couldn't be helped. There was a leak from my ceiling coming down from several floors above me, apparently, leaking through a lot of different floors before eventually coming out of my ceiling. But my downstairs neighbor didn't have to worry about it because it never made it through my floor. So no ripping up of carpets, just a little bit of cleaning. Nothing was ruined, it's all good. Just kind of had to deal with that instead of some other things that I was planning on doing, like recording this. But if these past couple of months have taught us anything, it's how to go with the flow and deal with the stuff we didn't think would be there, and realizing that the stuff we wanted to be there will be there when it's all over. And here we are at the end, about to listen to the song that we all made together. None of us realized we were creating a song when we started several months ago. We thought we were doing something else. We probably wanted to be doing something else. But all that time, we were making beautiful music together. The song is made up of compiled, found audio from a whole bunch of different worship services. All of them, in fact, that we've done over these months, where our only gathering together was through these screens. Some of you will recognize your voices. Some of you won't recognize the contributions you made in the small sounds that exist here and there throughout the recordings. Some of you will recognize my cat, Dorian. He had some things to say. And I'll say it. They were profound. Sometimes working around the things that we never expected to be there makes it all that much more sweet when we come around to the things that are still there at the end. We're not at the end of this months-long, and who knows how much longer, experience where this is the only way we get to see each other's faces. But I hope that this thing that we made together is a small reminder of what awaits us when we can finally join hands again and journey together that way. But to journey together.
But to journey together.
But to journey together.
think alike, but to journey together.
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 I mean, but to journey together.
Okay, that will do.
But to journey together.
To journey together.
But to journey together.
Hong Kong!
To journey together.
But to journey together.
To journey together.
To think like journey together.
But to 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 journey together. But to journey together. But to journey together. But to journey together.
I'd like to share with you a reading from The Stuff of Life, a graphic guide to genetics and DNA by Mark Schultz, illustrated by Xander and Kevin Cannon. This is Earth, as it appears today. It's a medium-sized planet with enough mass to hold a viable atmosphere, but not so much as to crush aspirations. Earth's early history was fairly typical of such celestial bodies. 5 billion years ago, it was no more than a river of dust and rocky fragments circling Sol, its sun. Over enough time, even dust clotting together, can gain enough mass to create a gravity chain reaction. Through the actions of gravity and accretion, Earth was born, a seething, molten world coalescing under the impacts of larger and larger additions. The radioactive decay of isotopes deep within this tortured ball created and stoked a constant furnace at its core. The surface was continually pelted with a rain of meteorites bearing exotic elements, most notably carbon, as we'll come to see. Then a long period of cooling began, with the young planet's bowels disgorging the gases and steam that contributed to its oceans and its nascent atmosphere, snugly held in place by Earth's gravity generating mass. All these factors, plus Earth's congenial distance from Sol, its rotation, and the subtle tilt of an axis that disperses solar heat around its surface, created the perfect conditions for the extraordinary phenomenon known as life, the transmission of base elements into compounds jump-started by a supply of energy into self-perpetuating organisms, the capacity to grow, to react to stimuli, to replicate, renew, and reproduce. Earth's first life was probably akin to the sulfur-eating, hypothermophile bacteria that still eke out their existence in the most extreme environments, doing quite well in their geologically active niches without benefit of sunlight or oxygen. But the organisms that pointed to the future of life on Earth were the cyanobacteria that invented photosynthesis, the ability to create their own energy from sunlight. For millions of years, vast colonies of them, matted and stacked into stramolitites, dominated the planet. And as a side product of their production of energy from water and sunlight, released incredibly huge quantities of oxygen, adding the formation of a new atmospheric mix, but offering fantastic opportunities for bold, new experimentation. Some novel protist enveloped and captured bacteria, and then found that they could all work together. Symbiosis. The bacteria evolved into cooperative organelles, and complex cells were born. Complex cells began joining to form multicellular organisms. At some point, now lost in time, some of them evolved a reproductive method called sex, which allows for the characteristics of two parent organisms to be passed in rich, variable combinations to a new generation. And things started evolving much faster. Multicellular organisms continued to evolve and differentiate into three broad classifications: plant, animal, and fungus. Recently, in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, because we all seem to have those nights these days to varying degrees, I turned on the TV. A series on Hulu grabbed my attention, so I watched the trailer. The young, athletic host of the show said, "It's become a cliche that everything is connected." I clicked the remote and went back to the main menu. He lost me. Since the world was captured by the writings of Alexander von Humboldt in the 18th century, and the scientific world was forever changed by his integration of botany, geology, biology, and physics as interrelated disciplines based in keen simultaneous observation of multiple factors, it has become an accepted fact. Everything is interconnected. Everything affects everything else on a microscopic level and on a cosmic level, socially and biologically. We know we are interdependent with everything else in the universe. It may be a cliche, but for me, interconnectivity is a driving idea of my life and proof that science and religion can coexist. A great example of that coexistence is the first person to recognize the patterns of inherited physical characteristics across generations of living organisms. Gregor Mendel was an Augustinian monk and friar of the St. Thomas Abbey in Moravia, a region of Austria, in the latter part of the 19th century. He's known today as the father of genetics. Before Mendel, the prevailing religious and scientific view was that like begets like, the proof of which for most people was in the Bible, and the fact that children look like a combination of their two parents, and that cows give birth to similar calves, and sunflowers produce more sunflowers. But Father Mendel noticed that sometimes like didn't seem to beget like. Sometimes there were variations that were inexplainable. So he decided to study the humble pea plant. He knew, probably largely from the work of people like Alexander von Humboldt, that physical traits must be observed and quantified individually, not as an aggregate of traits or as a generation of traits. Schultz explains in his book that Mendel isolated 7 traits that he sought to observe with peas: height, flower location, pod shape, pod color, seed shape, seed color, and seed coat color. Mendel then sought out interbreeding thousands of fast-growing plants and began to recognize the patterns of trait transmission from individual plants to the next generations. By using what he called true breeders, he set up his experiments so that he would interbreed 2 plants that differed only in one of the 7 traits. And what he found was that if he crossed a short plant with a tall plant, the result would always be a tall offspring. But if he crossed 2 tall plants, only 75% of the offspring would be tall. The other quarter were short. It took a lot of observation over many years and many traits. But this monk, a man of faith in a long black robe, came to the scientific conclusion that in every trait, there was always one that was dominant. Of course, it took a while for scientists to really understand all the complex workings of the passing on of traits, but this was the beginning of understanding genes and what we now know to be DNA, the basic stuff of life we all share, stuff that renews and reimagines itself with each generation, yet remains constantly the same on a molecular level. That's all kind of slippery though, isn't it? After all, we can't see DNA. Even our 23andMe charts and the findings of the Human Genome Project that has brought transformative understanding about who we are, how we're related, and how our DNA can help heal us. Historian Christopher E. Forth has a different way we can understand the basic elements of our bodies that make us who we are. Fat. In a book called Fat, A Cultural History of the Stuff of Life, he points out that game hunting and meat eating have been important in the evolution of humanity. But our ancestors didn't begin to really evolve into beings with great intellectual capacity until they began consuming the concentrated fats found in the brains and bone marrow of the animals they hunted and cooked. Without fat, our brains would never have evolved the way they did. We'd still be living in caves, vulnerable, and low on the food chain. And it all makes sense that fat is important to brain development. If you look at it individually and not generationally, you know that babies need fat for their brains to develop. Mother's milk and manufactured substitutes are shockingly high in fat compared to the average adult diet. In babies, chubbiness is a sign of health in a way we've collectively determined isn't healthy for adults. The other thing Forth says makes fat the stuff of life is that we love it. It gives food what he calls unctuousness, that greasy quality that feels satisfying. It's so satisfying, in fact, that it's addictive. The more fat we have, the more we want. But unctuousness is also about luminosity. For millennia, humans burned the fats of animals in lanterns to brighten the dark night, allowing them to share stories and work well after sundown. And unctuousness is also about cleanliness. Our ancestors discovered soap when they cooked meat over wood fires, when the fat combined with the potassium in the ashes. Fat has allowed us to be both illuminated and clean, to transform and even take control of our destiny. No wonder one of the definitions of unctuous is characterized by excessive piousness or moralistic fervor. We share the DNA of animals, yet we use their fat to improve ourselves. It makes us feel superior, especially now that we have the capacity to sort like with like, literally and figuratively, and make conclusions about the passing on of traits. Knowing that like begets like and having various degrees of self-control, a characteristic to which we give great value, we tend to be disgusted by fat. We tend to associate corpulence with lesser intelligence, and goodness knows in the modern world where highly processed, high-fat food is less nutritious and less expensive than whole foods, the system has made that a self-fulfilling prophecy. Those with fewer options for food also have fewer options for education. It's amazing how judgmental we can be about something we all need and benefit from. As Forth points out, we tend to be disgusted by fat as much as we're disgusted by trash. I have a confession to make. There's a family in our neighborhood that has 4 SUVs in the driveway of their modest and architecturally attractive home. When we moved in, they had one, which they drove daily, and it was full of stuff. Newspapers, boxes, clothes, toys, housewares, you name it. It got so full it couldn't be driven. So they parked it in the driveway and bought another one, which eventually got so full it couldn't be driven. So they bought another and another. They now own 4 mobile sheds, 3 of which are too weighed down to move. The confession is this: it bugs me that they have these 4 SUVs in the driveway, expensive storage for stuff that seems like trash to me. Why should it bother me? It has zero effect on me. And I'm not one of those people who's going to claim that the activities of my neighbors that I find annoying are decreasing my property value. I've bought and sold enough real estate to know how small the impact of one house is on a neighborhood. The bottom line is that the cars can be moved. I feel terrible about judging my neighbors. I haven't met them, but they seem friendly and decent. They wave and smile and say hello, and their flags and yard signs are similar to mine. So we belong to the same political and cultural tribes. I especially feel bad about judging them because of what I know about art. One of my favorite forms of art is called bricolage, a French term to express a method of making something from whatever materials are at hand, something created from a variety of available things. Bricolage artists create something new from the stuff we all have in our lives, things that many of us would consider trash. Often, the art pieces fill us with a sense of nostalgia because we recognize the elements of the assemblies. We feel connected by the common things in our lives. Claude Lévi-Strauss, no relation to the Levi Strauss who invented blue jeans, by the way, was a French-Belgian ethnologist and anthropologist who used the term bricolage to describe the patterns of mythological thought. The bricoleur, the person engaged in bricolage, uses the stuff of life, whatever materials, beliefs, or stories, or even music already existing, to build off of and create something entirely new. Lévi-Strauss described bricolage as a savage process, dominated by instinct and even opportunism. For him, it was a process of less value than what he called the process of the engineer, which he said is more refined, based on controlled experimental learning. To Lévi-Strauss, engineers were true craftsmen. I don't know about that. So much artwork that uses elements at hand can be gorgeous, even lush, layered with nostalgia, familiarity, and connection with all being. Fine engineering can be satisfying and transformative in the forms of the pyramids of Giza, the Golden Gate Bridge, the iPhone, or a composition of several people saying, "But to journey together." To my mind, my artist's mind, my theologian's mind, the engineer and the bricoleur have equal value. Lévi-Strauss is known as the father of structuralism, which was summarized by philosopher Simon Blackburn as the belief that phenomena of human life are not intelligible except through their interrelations. These relations constitute a structure, and behind local variations in the surface phenomena, there are constant laws of abstract structure. In other words, all of the stuff of life can only be understood by paying attention to all the other stuff. It's all interconnected. You can't understand history or even modern culture without understanding sociology, anthropology, linguistics, and everything else that made it what it is. It sounds a lot like the beliefs of Alexander von Humboldt and Henry David Thoreau, doesn't it? And that applies to everything. From our understanding that we are all manufactured from some ancient generation of star, to the value we place, or don't place, on corpulent bodies. So what does it mean in the 21st century? The era of Black Lives Matter and political tribalism. This era when so many of us, perhaps for the first time, are coming to terms with our identity in a dominant culture that assigns value to other cultures that we know little about. We could get some answers from the work of Theaster Gates, someone working with what he has and making the most of it, celebrating the stuff that tells stories of who we are and what brought us here. I first encountered Mr. Gates in Cleveland at a fundraiser for the Tamir Rice Center, being built by Samaria Rice, funded in large part by the settlement she received in the wrongful death by a police officer of her 12-year-old son. Gates is a professor at the University of Chicago and holds degrees in ceramics and urban planning, degrees he earned concurrently, before studying pottery in Japan and religion in South Africa. He calls himself a social practice installation artist. The New Yorker called him the real estate artist. Claude Lévi-Strauss would call him a bricoleur. He is the founder of the Rebuild Foundation, which is focused on culturally driven development and creating affordable spaces in under-resourced communities. The Rebuild Foundation buys abandoned properties that would otherwise be torn down for regentrification and imagines how they could serve communities to encourage creativity, and a deeper understanding of what makes his community what it is. And when he talks about community, he's not just talking about his neighborhood of Greater Grand Crossing. He's talking about the shared experience of Black people. He started by buying a derelict former candy store that he renovated into a home and studio for himself, so he could be embedded in that place as a resident and an artist. Next, he bought the former crack house next door, gutted it, and using common materials often reclaimed from the trash, created Archive House, a micro-library that functions as most libraries do these days. It's a community center and a safe space for youth with nowhere else to go. Next, he bought another rundown property and turned it into something truly magnificent, Black Cinema House, where he catalogs and screens hundreds of films made by and for Black folks as celebration of their culture. Now notice that he calls these buildings houses, even when they're public or semi-public. And that's intentional. He wants to use the buildings that are available, all originally homes, to conjure up a feeling of shelter and belonging, a place where you'll always be welcome, no matter how bad things get. His biggest project to date is the Stony Island Arts Bank, a repository of stuff, beautifully curated and accessible to all. It houses an enormous number of periodicals and books put out by the publishers of Jet and Ebony magazines, thousands of vinyl records, including the entire collection of influential DJ and producer Frankie Knuckles, who died in 2014, plus 4,000 objects of negrobilia, mass cultural objects and artifacts that feature stereotypical images of people of color. It's a whole lot of stuff. Some of it transcendent, some of it mundane, some of it just plain hard to look at. All of it there to be seen, touched, remembered as the stuff of the shared lives of a community, the stuff that made them who we are, the stuff that made all of us who we are. He's lifting up the fact that we're all connected through the things and the stories. But he's not just sharing the stories of Black people in Greater Grand Crossing for them to share among themselves. He's sharing the story of Black identity in a nation whose history includes their story, not as something separate in a sidebar or footnote, but as a major component of the text. Theaster-Gates' work is an example of structuralism in action. We can't know who we are and what our place is in the world today without knowing something about all of it. Social and political history, including the history of public spaces and land use, sociology and anthropology, art, film, literature, music, advertising, and mass-produced stuff meant to be used for a while and thrown away. Theaster-Gates helps us find the unctuousness in the stuff of life, the fat that feeds the light that helps us see, the fire that nourishes us, and the order that arises out of the chaos, the fire of the times. Gates helps us see the unctuousness of transformation and renewal. If we want a model for how to make peace with our past and to understand our roles in creating the world we live in, to put aside our judgments of each other based on spending patterns and body types and social and political tribes, to build a brighter future, he's a great example of how to do it. We have to get close to the stuff of life, from the DNA we share to the items we use and throw away. All of it, all that stuff makes us who we are. So yeah, It's a cliche. We're connected.
May nothing evil cross this door, and may their fortune never pry. Above these windows may the roar and rain go by. Our faith makes strong the rafters will withstand the battering of the storm. This heart through all the world may go will keep you warm. Peace shall walk softly through these rooms, as all the sheltering hold around, till every strive to keep their fields and to our shrine. With laughter drown the raucous shouts, and though these sheltering walls are thin, may they be strong to keep it out and hold our in.
That was good.
Everything that is connected may be a cliche, but it's true. You know, a cliche that's not true? Money is the root of all evil. I would say the need to control and the need for power are the root of all evil. Money is just what we exchange our life's energy for so we can get the goods and services we need or want. It's really pretty neutral. But when you think about it, if we're all exchanging our life's energy for money, then exchanging money for goods and services, it has an amazing way of connecting us, doesn't it? One way we at East Shore are connected to other organizations whose values we share is through sharing the collection with them once a month. This month, any offerings we receive not dedicated to pledge fulfillment will be shared with Black Lives Matter, Lake County. We're learning more and more that our history and our present are all bound up together, and that if we have any hope of ending racism, white folks have to step up and make it happen. So please, give as generously as you can. To close, I'd like to offer the words of Denise Levertov. As swimmers dare to lie face to the sky and water beats them, as hawks rest upon air and air sustains them, so would I learn to attain free fall and float into Creator's spirit deep embrace, knowing no effort earns that all surrounding grace.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Everywhere I go, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Building up a world, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Good job, that was people. Better, I think.
Show me.
Oh my goodness. Okay, you got it? Do you need more practice?
Can you turn it back on? Turn it back on. There you go.
Okay.
Although we're not ours.
Well, we're close enough. Does this look like a beard?
Yes, it looks like a beard.
Diana, it makes you Bluebeard.
We join hands in Unitarian Universalist Fellowship, pledging ourselves to an individual religious freedom which transcends all creeds, not to think alike,
but to journey together.